Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and this is my fabulous co-host.
Hello, I'm Megan.
Perfect. So before we dive into today's topic, let's do our weekly recap. What have you got going on, Megan?
So, oh my gosh, what isn't going on, first of all? But I have to share, I had an exciting weekend because I went to Homeschooling Unleashed in Raleigh, which was my first ever homeschool conference, even though I've been homeschooling for a really long time, because it's really hard to find a secular, inclusive homeschool conference. And so this was the first year they were doing it, and it was amazing. And Amanda, I met someone who listens to our podcast. So that was ridiculously exciting. So I was like, oh my gosh, like we see the numbers on Spotify and whatever, but we're a new podcast, right? So then and you know, we're thinking how many of those numbers are people that we like guilted into listening to us sometimes, maybe a little bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, friends, family, my own family listens to it, like, so a real true person, like out in the wild, it's pretty exciting.
I know. So I was like, oh my gosh, that was so exciting. So that was good. Yeah, so just, endless craziness around the house. My 12-year-old has a service dog, so I was just letting Amanda know that she was up all night with an upset tummy. So that was super fun. I was needing a little extra powder today to look like a living human. But yeah, otherwise, just kind of recovering from the conference. It was super fun and super awesome. I used to live in Raleigh, so I got to see some friends that I used to know from like homeschool co-op. Amanda and I met through a virtual book club for homeschool moms, and I got to meet one of the people who's in our virtual book club, who I've never met in person before. We had dinner one night, so that was super fun. Yeah, so the whole thing was awesome. It was 2 full days of peopling though. And ever since the pandemic, I don't people a ton. I found during the pandemic that I really liked not peopling a super ton. And so it's like, I love doing it in the moment. Like it's enjoyable, but then afterwards I'm like, shit, I need like a week of sleeping. So I was working on that until the dog got diarrhea. But other than that, it's great, So a busy week, but a good week. I will tell you, I hadn't told you this. So today is the day my lease is ending and I have to turn my car in. And my husband had gone out with some touch-up paint because we have a teenage driver. And so there was a need for some touch-up paint on a couple of the fenders. No one will ever notice. And today, when you turn in your car, you have to give them the 2 keys back or else they charge you like a small fortune for the second key. So my husband's like, where's the key? Where's the key? I'm like, I don't know, dude. I'm busy. I have a bunch of stuff going on. You're going to have to figure this one out, right? Like you're fully empowered to handle this. Apparently, when he went out to do the touch-up paint, he had put it on the roof of the car. And then my teen left to go to college for the day. And he found it like 2 blocks away in the road. I'm shocked he managed to find it. It had been run over, but it is a functioning key, so we shouldn't get charged for it. So, it's like one of those days where you're just like, what else? Throw it at me. I got this.
Come at me.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
So I was just glad the teenager didn't lose a key because then he would have been like, rah, 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 rah. If he does it, oh well.
Yeah. Oops.
Exactly. How about you? What do you have going on?
We like our main school year is done, right? And so I just kept thinking, like, if we get to the end of our traditional school year, like summer, we do kind of half school and it's a lot easier and it's going to be great. I'll be able to finally like catch up and recharge and things will slow down. And
that was funny.
Right.
Oh, delusional of you.
I know. I do this to myself every year, right? Summer comes and you're still doing half schooling, but then all of the things that you wanted to squeeze in, the pool days and the beach days and the play dates and the seeing the friends and the going to the museums and all the extra things that just couldn't fit in before, we're trying to squeeze them all in now. And so I'm kind of dying over here. And so there's like a whole bunch of things that go into that, right? I have several medical conditions, but one of them requires that I eat a lot of salt, which means that in the morning I wake up and I have a lot of puffiness and like water retention under my eyes, which is not a big deal. But this morning I was in bed and like trying to find the will to get up. It was like 10 a.m. and I'm like, I really have to get up and like get around. And my kid came in, he was like, don't you have recording this morning? And I was like, I know, I got to get up. I got to have breakfast. I got to have my coffee. I got to put those things under my eyes to help get rid of the big bags that I have under my eyes. And he was like, you know what, and he just motioned in front of my face. He's like, this is a messy moment. Don't you talk about messy moments in your podcast? And I was like, ouch. I mean, yeah, but
I was telling it like it is.
Right. Like, it just kind of summarized my last week, my last couple weeks. Like, it is a messy moment, but I'm trying really hard for it to not appear quite so messy. So yeah, there's nothing major. Just I'm dying for an easy week, and it's scheduled mid-August or something. I don't know.
There's a thing that I see all the time that kind of circulates on the internet that says like adult life is just telling yourself that next week will be better over and over and over again until you die. And I'm like, yes, that is it, right? I'm like, all right, because that was my week last week, right? I was preparing my presentations for the conference. I had organized to have like a flyer that went into the conference bags, and being extra, I decided like I would get little poppet keychains, because who doesn't love poppets? Like, we all know for our kids, manipulatives make learning easier. And I'm like, grown-ups work the same way. So like to have something at the conference to be able to do and whatever, So I had my kids there hole punching, things and putting them on the poppet keychains and whatever. And my 12-year-old was like, this is a child labor law violation. And I was like, keep hole punching. Right. So it was like, okay, if I could just get to the conference, things will be good, right? After that, it'll calm down. Now, freaking didn't calm down. You know what I mean? It's like, because then everything that I didn't do last week, because I was prepping for the rolled to this week, so now I'm getting caught up on life,
Yeah.
But next week will be better. So let's just keep saying it.
That's it. I'm not even pretending like next week. I know what next week is. Next week's the shit show. I'm not like it's. And then the week after I'm traveling again, so I'm sure that won't be better, but I don't know. Yeah, like I said, for sure there's a week in August that's going to be easy. I'm certain of it.
It's going to be great. Get all your rest in that 1 week.
Yeah, because that works so well for me. All right, so there's your catch-up life. Where it's not perfect. It's a little bit messy, and that's okay. So today's topic, today we're going to be discussing homeschool spaces, right? So setting up your homeschool space. We've got ideas from Pinterest perfect to practical. When the pandemic began and learners were sent home, desks were sold out literally everywhere. The default American mindset is that learning occurs at a desk, in a chair, at a desk, sitting still. However, that may or may not be the most productive choice for your family. So we're going to dig in. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's do. I'm excited to talk about this one. I have 3 kids and they all have different desks set up. So it'll be interesting to see what we get into. Before we do that, I just want to jump in and take a moment to thank our premier sponsor, Hub of Curiosity. Hub of Curiosity offers an incredible range of inclusive classes and co-ops. Their most popular classes this summer have been filmmaking camp. Sounds super fun. And a slew of STEM classes covering electrical wiring, automotive skills, and so much more. So there's something pretty much for everybody over there. All Homeschool Moms Unfiltered listeners can use coupon code OFCURE115. So that's OFCUR115 for $15 off their first Hub of Curiosity class. So thank you to Hub of Curiosity. And you can take your Hub of Curiosity from any kind of desk setup you want. So
it's true. I actually just signed my kiddo up for a Hub of Curiosity class. It's starting soon. He's going to do, there's one that is disassemble electronic things with safety glasses. I bought the safety glasses. I have them. We haven't hit up Goodwill for the broken electronic thing just yet, but I have another day to make that happen, so I'm fine. But I'm really excited, right? Because it's one of those things that I've been wanting him to do, and I've been a little apprehensive because I know nothing about electrical stuff and wiring, and my husband does, but he's busy, right? He just doesn't have that much time. And so this is kind of like that perfect, there's someone who's going to be kind of like watching and overseeing and helping explain things and providing the knowledge and info that he wants on the back end that I just can't give him. So I'm pretty excited about that. It should be fun.
Yeah, for sure. My kids went through a disassembly phase for sure. I mean, they still like to do that, although they're still tinkerers. They just tinker in different ways. But my youngest, when he was really little, had a deal with the Habitat Restore in town that if a CD player came in and it didn't pass their inspection to be sold, that they would hold it for him and he could go and pick stuff up once a week. And they had in our basement in North Carolina, we had like this workroom that was separated from everything else. And he and my oldest kid, oh my gosh, there were parts and pieces of laptops in there and all kinds of stuff, which is really cool. So yeah, I think the disassembly thing, right there's nothing better. In fact, we're talking about desks today. I'll get there, I swear. But it was really interesting because at the conference this weekend, Father Nathan Monk spoke, and
Mhm.
you're thinking like, oh, a secular inclusive conference, and there was a priest. No, he's left the priesthood, and it advocates for the LGBTQ community and stuff. Like, he's amazing. So he just keeps the moniker.
Mhm.
But he talked about the fact that like his love of wanting to, I want to say he's dyslexic. Yes, he is. I wanted to make sure I wasn't confusing him with
Mhm.
Jonathan Mooney, since that's our
No,
current
yeah,
book
he
club
is.
selection. But I'm
Yeah.
like, no, he's dyslexic. And he would be like, he would question things in ways that were unacceptable in our society, generally
Mhm.
speaking, right? And he'd be like, I want to figure out, like, I want to disassemble an alarm clock and figure out why it doesn't, why it does what it does, why it doesn't work, all that kind of stuff. And so it was funny because that's come up in conversation for me just recently, which is pretty awesome. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, well, that's super exciting. I hope kiddo has an awesome time in class. That'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It should
I
be
like it.
a good summer thing, right? Um,
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you never know where to lead. Rabbit holes are always fun.
mhm.
All right, so as you mentioned before, many homeschoolers default to creating school at home with desks and whiteboards and all that kind of stuff. And do not get me wrong, I love a good whiteboard. I one time was chatting with another mom, and we each counted how many whiteboards we had. And at the time, I think I had like probably close to a dozen, right? Each kid had one on their bedroom door for little reminders. There was one in the pantry for, notes. I mean, like, I have big ones, I have small ones. I keep one on my desk for my daily to-do list so that I can erase and change things easily, right? So I'm not saying I'm against whiteboards, love them, but kind of that traditional school setting where it's desks facing a whiteboard is not necessarily the same thing as love of whiteboard, right?
Mhm.
So it seems why to me, when we kind of came up with this topic, I was thinking like, okay, well, if we're mimicking school classrooms, why are school classrooms set up that way? Okay, like, is that the most ideal arrangement? Maybe it is, in which case, great. Like, if that's working wonders, let's do it. But the reality is, how many people are leaving the school scenario because it's not working for their kids?
Mhm.
So, reinventing that same classroom setup at home isn't necessarily going to be the most amazing thing. I can't remember if I've talked about it on the podcast before. My grandfather used to do this. He'd be like, "Stop me if I've told you want this one." But then even if you say like, "Oh yeah, I remember you telling me that," he'd still finish the story anyway. But I write a column for our local newspaper, and I was talking about homeschooling, and I was talking about the origination of the school system and how Rockefeller funded our school system and this, that, and the other thing, right? And in the U.S. at least, anyway. And I was mentioning in the article that there's a meme that goes around that says, it shows like a telephone in the 1950s, and then it juxtaposes it against an iPhone. It shows a car in the 1950s and then juxtaposes it against some, like sports car, electric, hybrid, whatever, and it does all these things. And then at the end, it's a school classroom. And it's a black and white photo of a classroom in the 50s of kids sitting at their desks, books open, teacher at a chalkboard. And then the current one is the exact same thing. It's just in color,
Yeah.
right? And so the whole point is that, like, the whole world has evolved and transitioned and shifted, and we're still teaching our kids the exact same way that we were when we were dialing rotary telephones that you
Mhm.
had to like crank, like in Mary Poppins, right? um, and so it seems wise to just figure out why there's even desks in classrooms to begin with. So I kind of dove in
Well, and
and
I
sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, I think that part of that too really comes down to the fact that there's just not enough funding, right? A lack of funding for
Mhm.
public education across the board, right? Teachers don't get paid enough. The schools are almost all in disrepair. The classrooms are old. The resources are old. You can't change materials when you need them. It makes me think of the fact that my nephew's school, one of the teachers got selected as a finalist for this classroom giveaway that some classroom furniture company was doing, and they were really advertising, hey, everyone go vote for her on social media so she gets this classroom. And the whole point was she wanted to change all of the desks into these new things that they can break apart to be individual desks when needed, and they come together to be tables so the kids can work together. And then it had separate like seating areas and reading nooks and activity, all of this stuff. And it was for an elementary, not just a kindergarten. We think, oh yeah, that makes sense for kindergarten, but it was for older kiddos, and
Yeah.
that thing, like those resources are out there, but it's insanely expensive to
Hmm.
replace all of your furniture. I mean, just think about in your home, you want to redo your living room. It's like, schools don't have the funding for that. And so we're stuck with this really antiquated way of doing it and moving forward.
That's an excellent point. And I mean, you brought up like we think about it for kindergarten, but it works for elementary. I mean, my kiddo, when we were living in Texas, one of my kids went to school for 1 year. Now, when I say went to school, you're like, that doesn't seem to track. She's like unschooling and like burn the establishment down. It was a Montessori high school, right? So it was as close to unschooling as you could possibly get. There wasn't even for high school, right? So it was only middle school and high school. It was a 3-story building. The bottom floor was all maker space, which was awesome. The middle floor was all middle school, and then the top floor was all high school. There wasn't a single desk in the school.
Hmm.
Right. So the rooms, they had these, even the building itself was modular. So they had these huge sliding glass pocket doors. So you could close off a room if you wanted to have a discussion about a book, or you could open it all up and have the whole entire top floor open if you wanted to. But to your point, the price tag that was paid for that luxury of being able to have this completely modern, utopic learning environment was no small thing, and it's not accessible to most people. So yeah, but I mean, even in a high school environment, it was ideal. I mean, they had a library with sofas and, you could play games in there and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was just this really awesome environment that unfortunately just isn't accessible for most
Yeah.
schools, which is a bummer. Yeah, so between us, we kind of dove in and read a ton of blogs about traditional classroom setups, and there's a lot of talk about flexible classrooms, exactly what you're describing, Amanda, right? Being the best for what learners need. So even the school system and studies that are being done about the school system are saying sitting at a desk is not what we would choose, not what we would recommend, but it's such a big ship to try and steer that it's almost impossible to make that change. Partially because of funding, partially because of cost, partially because of logistics, red tape, like all this stuff, right? So I was thinking, yeah, I mean, this isn't, the days of Laura Ingalls in a one-room schoolhouse, right? Like we don't need to just be sitting there with our chalkboards on our desk getting schoolwork done. We have plenty of opportunity.
And two, a lot of that is about mentality, right? You hear often, we have a friend who was just sharing with us that she was really frustrated because her husband felt like, well, if the kids aren't sitting down, doing work with books, and being instructed by you, are they even learning? And that is based on this, we were indoctrinated to believe that that's what education looks like. And people, they have a hard time accepting change if it doesn't directly improve their life, right? So as adults, sure, we've gone from a black and white TV that's a huge box in the corner of the living room to being able to watch everything on our phones or having our smart TVs mounted on the wall. It's convenient for us. We get way more out of it. We see the advantage to that evolution and that change. But as adults, it's hard for us to see the advantage to that change, that evolution in education, because we were there, we learned that way. It's not directly impacting us. And if you're not willing to take the time to learn about it and read the studies and see the differences and understand why it should evolve and the benefits of that evolution, it's really easy to be like, oh no, it's fine the way it is. Like, we can keep using the 1950s TV. Like, it doesn't impact me and it was fine for me back then, which none of us would say. None of us would actually be like, where's my TV from the 50s? Like, I don't want this smart TV. Well, there are probably some people out there, but probably no one listening to our podcast.
Unless by accident they pick it up on their tinfoil hat one day. Like, yeah, I was thinking like the first time somebody had to get up to change a channel while they were super comfy and they had to walk across the room to change the channel, right? Or sit through a 3-minute solid block of commercials with no ability to skip or whatever, right? That would be the end of
medieval torture.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think there's a lot to what you're saying. And I think also, even if somebody does go ahead and read the studies and this, that, and the other thing, right? And so you have a logical understanding of, yes, this makes sense. there's also a fear-based component. I mean, you're
Yeah.
doing something that's very different from what other people are doing. And there is this like, what if I completely fuck up my kids? Like,
Hmm.
that's on me at that point, right?
Hmm.
So it's like, I completely understand the logic of what you're saying, but it's also scary as hell,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like there's kind of an extra component there, right? Which is interesting. Um, so I think historically, I look at a lot about the history of the American school system and kind of how we got here today, right?
Hmm.
Why are we in the position that we're in? How did the school system start? What were its goals? Where did it fall short? Where did it miss turns that it should have taken? Things like that, right? So the origin of our school system was not to generate great thinkers, right? The origin of our school system was, and this is not an insult. I know people love to insult teachers by saying they're glorified babysitting and this, that, and the other thing. And that is not what I mean by saying this, but there is a component to our school system of needing something to do with kids during the day, right?
Hmm.
As we became a society where women went to work and were previously at home taking care of kids, or older generations were taking care of their kids, we needed something to do with these kids. And so there is that component where without the public school system, our society completely unravels, because what do you do with these kids all day, every day?
Hmm.
And so as the Industrial Revolution kicked off and more women were working in factories, what do I do with my kids? So that's a part of it, right? But then the other part was, you know, if you had money back in the day when the school system was coming out, you wouldn't be in that school. So you'd be somewhere else and you would have an opportunity to become a great thinker. There is a component in my head that thinks that those school desks where you're just sitting there confined into your little square is a really nice direct correlation to a cubicle life,
Mm.
right? Like if
Yeah.
you can do this for 12 years, you are rock solid ready to go to your cubicle when you're done with that, right? And you can
Yeah.
go do that for 8 hours a day instead of sitting at your desk for 6 hours a day. It's a really nice stepping stone. But I think it's interesting because even our big companies are changing things, right? So there's a quote that I pulled from, let me click on it. It was from formaspace.com. If anybody wants the link to the full article, feel free to DM us. I'd be happy to send it to you. But the article was called How Can We Rethink Classroom Design? And there was a quote in there that says office space planners, so not school, but offices, right? Corporate world. Office space planners are constantly looking for ways to make office designs more productive and to take advantage of the way people want to work today using mobile technologies such as smartphones and tablets. There's no need to be tied down to your cubicle or desk at a fixed PC workstation when you could move to the couch to read on your tablet, or meet a colleague in the cafeteria to review reports, or confer with your colleagues at an overseas office in a telephone conference room. Education curriculum planners are facing the same similar challenges when it comes to introducing the positive aspects of technology into their educational classrooms. As new technologies have become available, there's been a lot of trial and error to discover the right mix. For example, deciding how and when students should spend their time on a computer-based learning program or watching an interactive video. So it's a great example of kind of schools are out of touch, right, with
Mhm.
what corporations are doing, and what the future holds and the world that we're trying to prepare our kids for. But in an ideal world, our kids can function in that same concept, right? They can, have a discussion about books over dinner at the dinner table. They can take an online class on the back patio if it's a nice sunny day. There's flexibility in the way that we educate our kids.
There is. Though I would say the flip side to that is you don't have to throw it all out, right?
Right.
Like my husband's company recently did a big, change of everything, right? And it was supposed to significantly improve everything. They got rid of the cubicles and no one has assigned desks anymore. And it's all of these flexible workspaces. The problem is, he is on calls like 80% of the day. He's on calls with his team from around the world. So he doesn't often go into the office because he has to try to get one of the meeting rooms. He has to try to reserve a conference room and just be in there. And then there aren't that many because they're supposed to all be working together and collaborating. And his teams are all over the United States and the world. It just, it totally doesn't work. And now they're
Right.
having to revisit this like, well, when everyone is on calls and we only have so many conference rooms per floor, does this actually really work? You can't all be on calls in this open space room.
Right.
And so that idea, there are, yes, there's advantages to that and there are benefits to that, but there are also, if it works or a part of it works in your family or for your kids, and we'll talk about that more here in just a little bit, how we do it and how we actually implement it. But that idea, change is good. It doesn't need to look the way that it did look, but it doesn't mean you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can still have some sort of a desk for some of your schoolwork.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to your point, what works best for your kids? How do they learn? Right? What do your days look like? What do they want? You can ask them, you know? So I have, my kids are older, so it's a little harder to say. There was a lot more gathering around the kitchen table when they were younger or working in communal spaces. But like my 12-year-old is in math tutoring right now as we speak. His um, his school year style math class is done for the summer. But he's taking an Arizona State Universal Learner class, and he's meeting with his tutor for 30 minutes, 3 times a week, just to kind of help him through that. It's his first college class, and he doesn't really need help with the content. He's quite savvy at math and very ready for the class. It's more the executive function of doing the assignment, staying on top of the assignments, taking the notes, things like that. So he's got a support system in place for that. But that child can only take class sitting at his desk in his room in complete silence. If there is an ounce of noise or distraction, he's done. Right. And we've had days where like his computer will freeze or whatever might be the case. My husband had to do something not that long ago, like pop some extra memory in there or something. But we went through a little phase before that where his computer was chugging along and it was giving him a really hard time. And he'd come down in the middle of class all panicked, like my computer's, and I'm like, okay, no problem. I would immediately be like, get up, you can have my desk, right? We have a very similar setup. We each have 2 monitors, the whole thing. He cannot sit at it's not his, like the whole aura is wrong. I don't know, right? But it's like he has to be at his desk. He's got a bicycle chair, he's got a Weeble board, like he's got his bowl of fidget toys, and just he's in his space. He only feels comfortable and focused in his space. So it does kind of depend on the kid too, right? Like depending on what they need, is a day of isolation in their room going to feel amazing for some kids? No, right? But for other kids, like, and then he'll do his hour class, he'll come out, he'll play games, he'll go for a swim in the pool, he'll bounce on the trampoline, like whatever. And then he'll be like, oh, I have class at 2. And he'll go back and, take an online class or do something. And so he comes in and out. He's not in there all day by himself. That would be disastrous. But, what is the best environment for your kids? And I think sometimes we think we know that when they come home from school. But the reality is it's kind of like meeting somebody who is like, use like a silly example, like you're meeting somebody who's like in an unhappy marriage and you think this person. And then like 2 years post split, you're like, wow, you're totally not the person I thought you were, right? Because they were a product of the environment that they were in. And so they've morphed and evolved and blossomed and all of that, right? And our kids are much the same if they've been pulled from school under poor circumstances, right? If they've had a really rough road in school. So my advice would be like, don't base it on that because you don't really know what your kid's all about. All they know is that world that didn't work for them. So I would totally not spend a lot of money or do some big, huge setup or anything. Like that's the deschooling phase too, right? Take time, take a beat, take a breath. You do not have to have a fully functioning classroom set up on the first day you homeschool your child, right? Not at all. Wait and then kind of see what works for you and then build around that.
At what point are we supposed to have a fully functioning classroom set up?
You have approximately 90 days from the day you file your letter of intent. No,
damn it. I'm only a few years behind. I will get on that. I'll add that to my to-do list.
Yeah, right? I mean, you don't have to have, we see them all the time, right? And I see ones where it's like 3 kids lined up with like a divider between them. It looks like a call center, right? And they're all facing the wall and they all have the exact same setup and they've all got like a rigid chair. And I'm like, if that's working for you, that's great. But like I have 3 kids and the same thing does not work for all 3 of my kids. So like the odds that the same exact thing is going to work for all 3 of your kids is pretty slim. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's probably pretty slim.
Well, and even the idea that it's going to work for them through the entire day, right? It's easy to see a snippet of a moment on Pinterest or on Instagram or whatever social media you're on and think, oh my gosh, like my kids can't do that all day. That is not the reality,
Mhm.
right? We do in our home, I've mentioned this before, he doesn't have a full size desk. He's got a very small, like, in table, basically. And it's on these little legs that raised it up so that it's high enough that it fits. It's small and it's tucked into a corner of our living room. So he's got a wall on one side, the couch on the other, and he walks in and it works for him because it creates this kind of cozy little space. And then his computer sits up on a little stand so that it's raised up off of the table and he has room to put his notebooks or his workbook or whatever underneath and work on it while looking at the computer. And this whole setup, it works well for him for those classes that require that kind of watching the teacher, watching the lecture, writing things down in front of him or working on things. And I do it, occasionally I take pictures of him working on math or doing an art project or something like that at this setup. And if I post it, I'm sure people think like, oh my gosh, that's how they do it. But the reality is that works for those specific subjects, for that specific topic, for that specific time. It is not how our day is for the entire 6 hours that we're schooling or whatever the case may be. And it's important to remember that, right? Just because it works in this moment or for this subject, it doesn't have to look the same all day long.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. There are certain things that work better than others. Yeah. Um, yeah. The other thing that I've noticed is, okay, have you ever watched the Michael Moore documentary that he did about schools around the world?
I don't think so.
Okay, and listen, if you're listening, you can love or hate Michael Moore. He's a
Mhm.
very polarizing figure, right? But he did this documentary where he went around. He was basically trying to figure out why our schools in the United States are just plummeting in ranking
Mhm.
constantly, and like what are other countries doing that we're not? And there's this pretty substantial clip that's gets shared a bunch of times where he's in it's in a Nordic country, I think it's Finland, and he meets with the teachers and he meets with students and he meets with parents and all this kind of stuff, right? And it was so funny because at one point there's this clip where this teacher is talking about like love and joy and passion for learning and this, that, and the other thing, and the way she runs her classroom. And he's like, oh, that's amazing. What do you teach? And she's like, math. And he's like, you teach math that way? Like he was thinking she was an art teacher, right? And she's like, no, that's how we teach everything.
Mhm.
And they talk about the fact that their littles, only go to school for like 3 or 4 hours a day. And that includes recess and lunch and, all this kind of stuff, which FYI, we have an episode that we're planning that's coming up that's literally entitled What the Fuck Did We Do to Kindergarten? So we'll talk about that at a later date. But so if you're listening to this and you're wondering what kind of a desk your kindergartner needs, what's the answer, Amanda? What do you think?
You don't need a desk. If you want a desk to help with art to make sure they're not, painting on your floor, you can get a desk. You can do it at the kitchen table, but you don't need a desk.
Yeah, especially for
Yeah.
kindergarten. Oh my goodness, no. Just because the public school system has ruined kindergarten doesn't mean you need to traumatize your 5-year-old with too much work too. Um, so yeah, so he does this documentary, but it's really interesting because it wasn't part of that, but I've seen it with other things where people talk about the Nordic school systems in Finland and Norway and stuff like that. And when the kids come into their classrooms at the beginning of the year, the classrooms are essentially blank. They don't have, I mean, when you walk into an American classroom, it is, holy cow, it is the definition of overstimulation. I mean, if you are a
Mhm.
neurodivergent person that is overstimulated by things, holy shit. Can you imagine spending an entire day in a room where every square inch of something is covered with brightly colored things with cartoon lions and, letter, like everything on it. It's like, holy shit. Like there's something on every square inch. The classrooms that they have overseas in some countries, depending, right? There's different cultures all throughout and different ways of schooling, but some countries have an entirely blank classroom. And the kids come in and they get to make it their own. Their artwork is what goes on the walls. And they are the ones who kind of determine what works best for them through this kind of community system. And so if you're living in the States and you've gone to public school in the United States, and then maybe your kids did too, that is our view of what a classroom should look like. And there's so many people that I see post pictures, and they've got the alphabet border running around the room and all that kind of stuff. And if that's what is working for you, great, but that is not a must have. And just know that not everyone is doing that. And in fact, the countries that are doing way better than us in education aren't doing that, right? In their world, if their kids wanted to wanted an alphabet board, or let's say they, through conversation, they find out that, man, it would be really helpful to have a visual to know sometimes they get mixed up about the order of the letters. And my guess would be that those kids would sit down and as a community, as a collective, figure out what they wanted to create, and they would create this,
Yeah.
right? It's a very different approach. And so, no, you do not need to have a calendar pocket thing with the little holders where you slot the days of the week and all that kind of stuff. Not everyone is doing that. It's just us. It's just the United States, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some other countries too, but not everyone. That is not universally across the board the one and only way to educate a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What about homeschooling approach? So we homeschool very differently, Amanda. You've kind of described your setup. When your kiddo is not at his desk, what are some of the other ways that you're traipsing around in homeschooling?
Yeah, so if we're doing our academic stuff, we're doing our classes at home, he will do most of his online classes at his little nook, in his little cocoon space. Beyond that, he is often on the couch or the floor for reading whenever he needs to read. So most of his ELA and, anytime he's reading books, he's lounging on the couch or sitting on the floor. If we need to work on something together, he actually sits on the floor and I sit in my chair. I have like a comfy kind of, recliner sort of chair in the living room. And I'll sit there and he'll sit on the floor. It works for us because it allows him to wiggle and move. He's kind of constantly in motion. And so we'll be talking about things. We tried, some of the like wobble boards and different things like that. They did not work for him. He just doesn't enjoy that, but he likes to be able to, just fidget kind of constantly and be, just squirming and wiggling around, even though he's 10. And so we do, I have a little whiteboard, not one of the great big ones, but I have, a little handheld paper size one. I've talked about it before. And I'll, be writing on that while he's right in front of me and we'll be working through something. And he has a clipboard for when he needs to be working on math or something like that. And he'll have it on his clipboard while he's sitting on the ground so he can move around and the clipboard moves and the clipboard gets set down and he's following what I'm doing on the whiteboard. It's very in motion in our home.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's that thing. That's what works for us and his learning style.
Yeah, there's and you were like, even though he's 10, he still squirms. Like there's no age limit for squirming. It was funny because so Amanda and I kind of divide and conquer when it comes to podcast tasks. And I post a lot of the social media clips, right? And so there was one the other day where it was like this really great point that you were making, and I was listening to you chat, and I was squirming I was trying to like reposition myself on my chair, and I was like, should I post this on social media? Because it maybe looks a little like I'm bored or disinterested, but I have that new, I forget, I think the company is called MindSpring that makes the ADHD chair. That's what it got labeled, the ADHD chair on TikTok. It's not really like that thing, but it's a modular chair that you can position like 20 different ways. And so you can sit cross-legged or you can sit like squatting and backwards, forwards, like all this stuff, right? And it's great for being able to fidget in your own seat if you are at a desk setup, And so I was like repositioning myself in my chair during your clip, and I was like, this doesn't look great. But I'm like, what the thing Amanda's saying makes sense. I'm gonna post it anyway. I'll just look like an idiot on the internet. But well, probably won't be the first time, probably won't be the last time. But yeah, like there's no age limit for squirming. I'm 43 and I have a chair that lets me literally shift all the time because that's what keeps me focused when I'm at my desk. So yeah, it's get whatever works for your kid. My kid does have a wobble board. He loved it. He discovered his wobble board in speech after he had he had 3 frenectomies, which is not, you're like, how many tongues does he have? He only has 1 tongue, I swear. But he had a tongue tie under the tongue. And then he also had ties, which was really interesting, on the top, on the sides, like where, like just past his canines on the top, he had 1 on each side that somehow he got, despite the fact that I take him for regular visits and we'd seen like 3 ENTs for all sorts of issues. And the ENT said the one under the tongue wasn't significant enough. And then nobody caught the one on the top until we found like just the right person. And the kid has been a raging insomniac his whole life. So you would think somebody would have been like, let's dive a little deeper there. But anyway, he had to go through a whole bunch of speech after he had them all cut because they had been there for so long. And they had a Weeble board at speech, and she would let him do his speech activities on the Weeble board because he couldn't sit still to do the speech activities otherwise. And he was like, can we get one of these for home? I was like, boom, it's already on its way from Amazon, right? Amazon, you know, that Amazon Basics line that's basically like a generic of everything. Yeah. They sell a Weeble board, and it's like less than $20, I think. It's been a while since I've ordered it, so don't quote me on that. But and then he has a bicycle desk, and he does not have a chair at all. The bicycle desk is the standard chair. And he loves it. It's got a counter on it. So if you have a kid who loves the dopamine rush of like hitting 6 miles in math class, go. It's amazing. Right? It's got that on there. I bought his on QVC because I like 4 easy payments. Like I'm all about it. It just makes me feel better when I'm spending money on things that I'm like, it feels somewhat frivolous, but it actually turned out to be like one of the best things. So I liked my 4 easy payments. But yeah, consider your kiddo, consider the type of schooling that you're going to be doing, and you know, all of that. If you're mainly project-based learning and you're homeschooling multiple ages of kids and all that kind of stuff, odds are really good you're going to end up at a big kitchen table, right? Like, you know, and that is going to be the thing, right? And just, I would recommend really getting yourself a mantra about your kitchen table, getting glue on it and being okay with that, right? Like that is, it's the homeschool way. And it's okay. It'll work, you know?
Yeah. I think too, letting go of expectations, right? So much of homeschooling is about letting go of expectations, and desks are one of those. So my kiddo does have a full-size desk in his bedroom, and I think when we bought it, we probably did envision him taking his schooling mess out of our living room and our main space, you know, and into his bedroom and making it a corner in the bedroom. That didn't happen.
So hopeful.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. The hopes and dreams of the naive mom. And instead, his full-size desk is actually his stop motion movie studio for making Lego movies. And there's a whole setup, and it's, you know, like there's always sets over to the side and the setup in the middle that, you know, and things get moved in and out, and it's a thing. And I had to let go of that, you know, like, well, we're, you know, what kind of chair should we use? Well, we'll use our Stokke chair that it adjusts for height and based on age, and yada, like, okay, no, the Stokke chair is still in the main living space, and he has no chair at his desk in his bedroom because he needs to be able to move around while he's doing his filming and his recording. And then he got another small table with a small chair that his typewriter sits on because he has an old-fashioned typewriter. He likes to type on an old school typewriter, and that, you know, but it's just this little space and it's there, and that it's not, we're not messing with the desk. The real desk is a recording studio for Legos because that's our life.
Yeah. You're literally not confined to really anything. Mm-hmm. I will say it's my standard disclaimer. I've never homeschooled in like New York and Pennsylvania. You all have rules that I can't even fathom. So maybe there you have a little bit more being stuck to things than I'm aware of. But I have a friend who I'm hoping to have on as a guest. I'm excited for you to meet her, Amanda. She's homeschooling this amazing 16-year-old. And she homeschools in New York and has been very interest-led. Her kid is, I've had him in my World War II classes. He's so smart. I mean, so smart and just so incredible and so well-spoken, and just, he's a joy. He's like, if he ever missed class, I'd be sad because he just brought so much to class. And so I'm hoping to have her on to kind of talk about those like high regulation states and how you can meet your state standards without dying underneath the weight of them. Right. Yeah. But I forget how I got there, but anyway, I don't know. We were on something, but anyway, I was going to say, like, you know, kind of letting go of some of those things, like you were saying, Amanda, like, and reinventing things. You're not stuck to anything. Amanda and I were having a conversation towards the end of last year. She was talking about her kiddo having to put his name and date on papers that go to
Mhm.
the charter school, right? And like
Mhm.
struggling with that. And I was like, right. So I'm like the, super wacky hippie homeschooler. And I was like, dude, I would totally buy, one of those stamps. I remember when I was a kid and I used to go to my mom's office, just taking a blank piece of paper and stamping like
Mhm.
10,000 times. I'm like, I'd buy him a name stamp. And then, those date ones like they used to have at the library for like when they would stamp the little cards to return stuff. Like, I'm like, that would be a fun way to name and date things. You'd probably have to get him to stop putting his name and date on things. If you, you know what I mean? You'd be like, once is plenty, right? Like, so I'm like, if there's ever a thing that you're like thinking like, right, you do it a weird way. It doesn't have to be done the way you quote unquote think it has to be done or whatever. And sometimes it's hard for us to break those things. We all have them, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes it takes having that circle of friends too to like throw in like 5 weird ideas and you're like, oh my gosh, this is perfect, right?
Yeah, no, let me try that one because I did. I totally got the date stamper. He has the old school. And that was it. He really liked the old school one where you change each of the numbers,
Yeah.
and dating things is no longer a struggle. Everything gets a date. It's really easy in our house now because he loves the, you know.
It feels like he's working in a print shop in like in the 1800s or something,
Yep.
right? I love
Yep.
it, right? I mean, we talked about it in that god awful book by John Holtz, like that so much of our schooling is to prepare you for the fact that life sucks and it's
Mhm.
miserable and you just have to do the things that you have to do because you have to.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that book, okay, we didn't like a lot of things about that book, but it's a valid point,
Mhm.
right? Like, yeah, there are grown up things that sometimes you just have to suck it up and do. Like, I don't like doing taxes and paying them, but I also don't like going to jail. So, like, we have to do those things, right? But it's like there's plenty of things that we're not stuck with suffering through. Like, and I'm not saying he was suffering by having to date a piece of paper, right? But like, you're allowed to funify whatever you want. Like,
Mhm.
have fun, find out what makes your kid tick. The fact that your kid had asked for Christmas for an antique typewriter or like a vintage typewriter, I was like, oh my gosh, this kid's gonna love a date stamp. Who are we
Yeah.
kidding? Like
Right.
this
Yeah.
is
No, that's
right up his alley.
exactly. And that thing, I was totally like, "Whoa, I hadn't even thought of that. It didn't even cross my mind, but let's see," And I mean, it was like $5 for the stamp and the pad together, and so, I'm out $5 if it doesn't work, and it worked, and it eliminated a huge power struggle in our house of like, "Put your date on the damn paper," like, uh, and again, it's hard to find the right community, right? We have a whole episode on finding community, but throw these little struggles out there and be open to the idea that it doesn't have to happen the way that it would happen in a public school classroom. Your kid
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to write their name and their date at the top of the paper in pencil, in a number 2 pencil, and turn it in for it to count, right? We get to make it work how we want. We use mechanical pencils. I don't know about you all, but we have
Oh heck yeah.
handwriting issues in our house as well, and so a sharpened number 2 pencil is like my worst nightmare. We have loads of mechanical pencils because it
Mhm.
makes life so much easier, right?
I bought for the holidays last year. So my daughter likes the Paper Mate one where you turn the tip and
Mhm.
the little bit of lead comes out. They're yellow. They're a little different. Instead of like pumping
Oh
the
yeah,
eraser
yeah, I do
to get
know
the thing
them.
out. Yeah, and she likes those. And she's an artist, so she does have this like connection to tools, right? She likes pens that write a certain way and all that. And so I had posted in a homeschool group that Amanda and I are both in, like I said, like, moms, what are the pens that you're hiding from your kids because they're so good, right? Like,
Mhm.
those are the ones that she's going to want. And she's got a wildly imaginative ADHD brain, and she info dumps into notebooks all day long. I mean, if you go into her, we put a TV, talk about letting go of the way things were quote unquote meant to be. She has a studio on our property that's about a 200 square foot she shed, because she has 6 sewing machines and a 60-inch floor loom and all this kind of stuff. Like, there's no way that was fitting in our house. And we mounted an old TV that we had in there, thinking she takes class from a college in Canada, and she's on Zoom for like 4 hours at a stretch. So we were thinking she could Chromecast it to this big TV, and it would be easier for her to see than whatever. The TV holds post-it notes with ideas on it. And that's all that's on this. She's never once, I don't think, put anything on the television. So it's just covered with brain dumped post-it notes,
Mhm.
right? So at the holidays last year, I was like, what kind of pens and pencils? And the paper make people, they make like a titanium edition of that
Mm.
mechanical pencil that has ridges on it, which
Mhm.
is either going to be a sensory nightmare or a sensory haven.
Mhm.
And she loves them. So yeah, mechanical pencils are life in this house. We don't even own a pencil sharpener, which I think could get us like kicked out of the homeschooling community. But it's mainly just because we use a mechanical pencil for everything. So
We have a pencil sharpener because we do have sharp like actual pencils, but they are I don't actually know the whole story behind them, but they're these super special pencils from Japan that are
ooh,
very expensive, but they apparently write amazing. It's some kind of like specialty pencil that my husband and my kiddo like, and they will do like pencil drawings together just with these
oh,
specific pencils, right? Because they're regular lead pencils, but special lead pencils. I don't know. I've not actually used them. I'm good with
you
my
might not be allowed to. I don't know if you meet the criteria to touch the special
this is
pencils.
true. There's some truth to that. I'm like,
The guys in your house might be like, no, these are our
yeah,
special pencils.
you don't understand and appreciate. We don't get to touch your colored pens. You can't touch our special pencils. Okay.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, right? But there is a sensory component to
Mhm.
writing materials and stuff like that. Find what's working for your kids, right?
Mhm.
And it might not be the same for all kids, and
Yeah.
that's okay, right? I mean, especially if you have a neurodivergent kid, join Facebook groups for those things. I mean, people have their kids sitting on exercise balls. There's like cocoon tents that mount into the
Mhm.
ceiling. Some of them, if you're renting or you just don't want to drill a giant hole into your ceiling, some of them have like a base that comes on the floor and then it kind of like arcs up and
Mhm.
kind of like a hammock and the tent swings from there and stuff. My autistic ADHD kiddo is a huge fan of enclosed spaces. He sleeps in a sensory tent. He cocoons. He likes tight spaces. He can focus in tight spaces. Sometimes even literally just having like a small tent in your living room if you
Mhm.
aren't, if the movement is key for my kiddo, so the swing tent option would be his jam. But at the same time, many autistics feel that the floor has a really grounding presence. So if being in an enclosed space on the floor is amazing for your kiddo, toss up a little pup tent in your living room, right? I mean, who cares as long as it works for your kid and it's something you can pull off, go for it.
I laugh because when my kiddo was younger, we did the whole Montessori bedroom, right? And we did a Montessori kindergarten, but before that, we were doing the Montessori. So everything was low. There was nothing he could climb on and get hurt, but he could reach everything. And we had a bed, a very low bed frame from IKEA, one of those ones that just is basically sits on the floor and then the mattress was on it. Um, and it did not matter what I did or what I tried. Every night I would make sure that he was in his bed to go to sleep and I would turn off the light and he would have his little night light. And when I would finally go to sleep, I would go to check on him before going to bed. He would be on the floor, passed out on the floor with the light on, the bedroom light on. And I would move him into his bed and I would turn the light off. And every morning when I would get up, he would still be asleep, but he would be asleep back on the floor with the bedroom light on. And it was one of those like that was the my first like really letting go of my expectations, right? Like for whatever reason, this kid likes to sleep on the floor. So we're just going to have to get with the program and be okay with it. And then that, you hear everywhere like, oh, it needs to be dark. It needs to be dark and quiet. He didn't want dark and a nightlight was not cutting it. He turned on his lamp every night. And it was, what, 2.5. Like, why am I fighting this? Why am I holding on to this so hard? Oh, it's got to be dark, like, so you can get up 3 times in the middle of the night and turn it back on because that's what you like. Surely I'm hurting his sleep more than
Right, you're
just letting
disrupting
it,
his
yeah,
rest.
than just letting him sleep all through the night with the light on.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I guess so much of homeschooling is letting go of these things that you grew up with or that you think or that you've heard and just really embracing what you discover works for your kids, not what you think is going to work for your kids, but trial and error and the discovering what works and then implementing it and knowing that just because it works this year or this month doesn't mean it's going to work next month and being open to doing that whole process all over again.
It's so true because my insomniac sleeper used to have an army of night lights. I mean, it was just like there was a glow coming out from under the door. The light itself was off, but there were so many night lights. And now he sleeps in a sensory deprivation tent with room darkening shades, and right, there's to be no light. He even puts a post-it note over like the little thing on the computer monitor that
Mhm.
has like a little glow on it. He'll post-it note that to make sure that that there's no light in his room whatsoever. So he evolved, right? He
Mhm.
changed what was comfortable for him from a sensory perspective changed.
Yep.
Um, so I like it. Yeah. So let go. It's fine. Right.
Yeah.
And these are the, when they say like pick your battles, like a lot of this stuff is like, that's the stuff we don't battle over, right? Like it's
Mhm.
long term. You're like, is this really going to make it? No, it's not. Let's move on.
Yeah, that's it. Like which things really matter. And there will be things, right? Just like with parenting, there will be things that are like, I know you don't really love this, or I know you're not crazy about this, but I do think that this is something we need to implement. There, in life, in homeschooling, in parenting, every once in a while, you do have to, no matter how gentle a parenting approach you're trying to take, you do have to pull that, because I'm the adult. And in this case, I really do think that I know what's best. But
Hmm.
it does not have to be that way constantly. That does not need to be your life. And everyone will be much happier if you get to a place where that's not your normal. It can be bumpy getting there, right? Changing those habits and those expectations and that family culture, it can be bumpy getting there. But once you get there, everyone will just be so much happier.
Hmm. Okay, I'm wiggling in my chair, Amanda. See, 43
I,
years old. I got to reposition in my chair.
when you were telling that story before, I was thinking I had just been sitting and I was like, I had one leg up in the chair and I was a little uncomfortable. So I put the other leg up in the chair. So I was sitting cross legged in the chair. And then once I got there, I realized the reason I was uncomfortable was because the original foot that was up was actually asleep. And so then I was trying to put both legs back down without totally hitting the table that my computer sits on. So I'm like, yeah, everyone
Yeah.
does it, right? Everyone wiggles and moves
Mhm.
around. Like it's just no one can sit perfectly still. And the fact that we think people can or do is ridiculous. And the fact that we put that on kids and grade them on whether or not they can hold perfectly still in a way that none of us could, right?
And what's the real life value in that? Like, where's the payoff in mastering that skill at some point anyway, right? Like, it doesn't exist. I know I get messages through my other kind of avenue of homeschool work that I do. And I got one the other day, and it was about a 5-year-old who just wanted to play all day and wasn't focused on studying. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? Like, they're 5. Let them go
Mm-hmm.
play. They're supposed to, they didn't have a good attention span and this and that. I'm like, it's a 5-year-old boy. Not to be sexist, but oftentimes the boys, it does take them a little longer to kick in, right? That's genetics, that's science, right? Um, let them go play. They're 5.
And the thing is, even if you want to be like me and you want to be an aggressive academic homeschooler at 5, 30 to 45 minutes of total direct instruction is plenty, right?
Mhm.
Like you do not need to come anywhere close to even a full hour of this is the direct instruction. The rest of the time, they should be all over, and their attention span is going to be 5 minutes or less at the age of 5. So if you're doing 45 minutes of direct instruction, it's broken up in 5-minute chunks. You might get 5 minutes of math, and you might get 5 minutes of the alphabet, and 5 minutes of practicing drawing circles. But yeah, that's just how it is. They're kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. All right. So yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully, we hope you got something out of our kind of how to set up your space thing, because I think most homeschoolers, when they decide to homeschool, it's like I'm buying curriculum and desks. Like that's kind of the two big things. And in our first episode, we kind of talked about like slow it down when it comes to buying curriculum. Even if you want to be an academically a super vigorous one, slow it down, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's stuff to do before you buy homeschool curriculum. There's a lot of decisions to be made and big picture things to consider. And the same is true for your desk space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. How you set up your classroom does not need to look like a picture of a traditional classroom. It needs to
No.
look like whatever works for you and your kids. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so with that, I'm going to say, here's our little plug for us. Did you know that you can schedule time with Meagan and or me, Amanda, to address your specific homeschooling needs? It's easy to book through the link in the description or through the link on our Instagram bio. Whether you would like help choosing the perfect curriculum, that'd be me, Amanda, or, if you have questions about unschooling and writing transcripts, I know nothing about that, book with Meagan. We're happy to help. So we do this kind of one-on-one coaching. It's easy to book. If you have a quick question and you want to run it by us, you can do that through any of our social media platforms. We're happy to answer a quick question or help direct you or help you figure out. And if it's kind of one of those things like, man, I'm not really sure, and I liked what Amanda said on this and I liked what Meagan said on that, we do joint coaching as well. So you can book both of us, or you can send a quick message and say, I really want to talk about this thing. Which one of you, do you think would most be able to help me? We're happy to help out that way too.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
One last thing. We are all in 1,000,001 homeschool Facebook groups, right? Like there's so many. We're in so many as well. If you love our content, we would be so, so grateful if you would spread the word on your favorite homeschool groups. We're not going to lie. There are some seriously kick-ass guests that we would love to have come on. We have kind of a dream guest wish list that we keep running in the back. And if we can, dazzle them and super impress them with our popularity stats, the odds that we get them to agree to actually come on our podcast definitely increase. So please, if you have the time, take a minute and shout us out. If someone is asking, how do I start? Or does anyone have recommendations for this or whatever? Like, oh, there's this there's this podcast that maybe you don't have to call us great. You can call us great. I would love it if you did. But, there's this podcast that talks about it that you might find useful. We'd really appreciate it.
Yes, you should digest every single episode. Binge listen. It'll be amazing. Yeah. I love it. All right. So we're about to get into our rotating segment for the week. We've got a new one for you that we haven't done yet. But beforehand, I just wanted to say hello and shout out to Kelsey, who I met, at Homeschooling Unleashed. And so my friend Wendy said, oh, you should meet this person, and introduced me. And then I asked them for their names a second time. And I said, I can almost guarantee you I'm going to forget that. So I met Kelsey and her amazing wife. And I apologize because I forget your wife's name. I'm terrible with names. Like, it's amazing I remember Amanda's name. Like, it's so bad. I lead a book club, and the kids it's for middle school and high schoolers, and the middle schooler, they tease me because we'll be in like the fourth week of a book. We're like 300 pages into a book, and I'm still struggling to remember the main character's name. And I know the whole story, and we've gone so deep into I can't remember the main character's name. So I'm so sorry that I forget your wife's name. But Kelsey, and your amazing wife, it was so lovely to meet you this weekend. If you're ever at an event and one of us is there, come say hi, because it makes our whole day. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So related to our topic today, I've got a new segment for us. Here we go.
Things that make your host say, what the f***?
Yeah, this was one of those moments. Okay, so I was doing some research for our episode because Amanda and I kind of take our mashup and dump it into our notes for the week, right? And so I read study after study where researchers found that things like lighting, comfortable temperature, and access to fresh air helped kids learn better. Like, really? No shit, Sherlock. Really? How much money did we spend on these studies? Okay, that we needed to know this. Okay, they'd have more money for desks and updating their classrooms if they didn't spend money on stupid crap like this. Anyway, this was my favorite WTF moment from the whole thing. There was one study that referenced data walls. And this is, I literally quoted it directly from the page because I couldn't handle it. It says, some schools believe that data walls motivate students to try harder. The research casts doubt on that conclusion, especially at the margins, where struggling students need the most help. Okay. Students in quote unquote the red zone of public data walls are often mocked or derided by other students for their poor performance. Researchers who reviewed 30 empirical studies, we spent money on 30 empirical studies on the topic, explain in a 2020 review, dampening enthusiasm and confidence for kids who need it the most. Data walls can trigger quote unquote positive emotions such as pride, hopefulness, and joy, as well as negative feelings of stress, anxiety, or disappointment, depending on where the student ranks in the list. I mean, really, did we need a study to tell us that if somebody bombs something or struggles with something, that blasting them publicly on a fucking wall, comparing them to kids who do it amazingly well, that that's not going to go well, that that doesn't do things for their
You mean
self-esteem, that
it doesn't
it
just
doesn't
motivate
motivate
them?
them.
Yeah, just like, oh, I'm gonna try harder next time because I want to, like, yeah.
Right. Dyslexia be damned. I will be number one on the reading list next
Hmm.
week because the data wall says so, right?
Hmm.
Quote unquote, the idea behind data driven decision making is a good one, explains assessment expert Lori Shepard. But even data walls that use anonymous ID numbers are harmful to many students because kids know what it means if they see themselves as a red or yellow learner. The
Hmm.
takeaway in this grand study of 30 plus empirical studies, using data to inform instruction is good practice, but public displays or public ranking are neutral or beneficial for only a subset of higher performing students. What the fuck? We needed, I mean, really? This needed that many studies to figure out that publicly embarrassing people who are struggling is not the way forward. And so, like, what the fuck? What? I couldn't freaking believe. I literally sat there. My kid was vending at the farmer's market. He sells dog treats at the farmer's market. And I sit there and I get work done the whole time that he's at the farmer. And I was sitting there and I'm like, I can't even believe what I'm reading. This is the most astronomical thing I've ever seen. So
Yeah, it's shocking that you had enough research studies to be able to do a meta-analysis of the research studies to say, you know what,
right.
actually publicly shaming people doesn't work. Only a
Doesn't
few
have the effects
people,
we
yeah,
thought.
only a few people actually benefit from being blasted. Like,
The ones who are already succeeding.
yeah, yeah.
Right? You know,
Yeah,
or the
I'm the
ones who love
best.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's a nice pat on the back for them. I
Mhm.
was like, and so I think I go back to this time and time again. Like I was talking to this amazing person that I met at the conference over the weekend who does not homeschool. She's a college professor, and is starting a not-for-profit in Chicago to try and assist and educate Black and Brown parents in particular about homeschooling, to help them find the tools and resources necessary to remove their kids from a school system that is so tragically failing their children. Right. And so she was amazing. Loved talking to her. Unbelievable. And it was so funny because I was saying, like, I talk to parents all the time who are saying, like, well, what if I fail or what if I don't do a good job? And I'm like, the bar is set so damn low,
Mhm.
like so damn low. Right. I mean, this is who's educating our kids, people who are like, maybe public shaming will work. Right. And I'm like, how could you do worse? Like,
Mhm.
how could you do worse? And I know that that's a horrible way of looking at it because you don't want
Mhm.
to be like barely mediocre at best, but
Yeah.
you're still doing better, right?
Mhm.
You're still providing a better option for your kids than potentially public shaming them on a wall of shame at school,
Yeah. And
right?
the thing too is if you are not yet homeschooling, you're listening to this and you're thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to homeschool. I'm trying to do research. I'm trying to learn about it. Or if you do homeschool, but you have friends or relatives whose kids are still in public school, you can take this data, this knowledge, this information. It's easy to Google, but help advocate for in the classrooms where kids are still in the classroom. Like, hey, let's not be doing this. Like, the research is really solid. Like, let's not be blasting them on the wall for, the 75% of the kids who are not doing great in X, Y, or Z. It does not help. Yeah, we can advocate even outside of just
We've done
homeschooling. Yeah.
not one, not two, but 30 empirical studies
Mhm.
and then a high level study. And it doesn't seem like this is working.
Yeah.
I can't. It's so broken. I can't. You're a nicer person than me. I'm like, I took my kids and ran. I'm like, I can't. It's such a sinking ship that I'm like, I can't. It's too big. But you're a better person than me. Yes, advocate. Do what Amanda says. Don't do what I did.
I mean, it's that thing where you have the energy. You have to use your energy where you have the energy. But if you could make a difference even with one teacher in one classroom, that's 25 to 30 kids a year that are not getting this at least for 1 year. And that could make all the difference, right? And maybe that teacher, maybe it cascades and it ends up being just an out of fashion thing in a school. I mean, how amazing would that be to know that you made that change in your local neighborhood school?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So with that, we're going to wrap up with our mantra for the week. Okay. So here we go. I am wrangling chaos with fortitude and turning it into educational gold. Or at least that's what I'm telling myself today. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it may not be true, but if you keep saying it, maybe eventually it will become true.
Exactly, right? Yeah, pave that path of success with your
Hmm.
mantras. I love it.
Hmm. Visualize,
Oh,
visualize and succeed.
yeah. Well, if you do share a photo at any point of what your classroom looks like or what your kiddos setup looks like, I mean,
Mhm.
I see so many pictures of kids like flopped upside down on sofas reading books or whatever. Tag us. We'd love to share them in our stories and
Yeah.
say, like, here's an awesome setup. It does not
Mhm.
have to look like anyone else's as long as it's working for your family. That's pretty awesome. So
Yeah.
have a wonderful rest of your day and happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a good one.